Hello, N4 H&H here. A question came up on the YouTube channel here about the internal antenna tuner on the FTdx10. Can it be inserted into the receive circuit? And the answer is no, and that's why you don't even see an option for that in the radio. Now, you may be wondering, well, I have seen that on some radios. Yes, some of the radios of the past or radios that include a wide range antenna tuner definitely may give you that option. My old Yaesu FTdx10, for example, gives that option. But the tuners that you're seeing in the modern radios, radios I would say in the last 10 plus years, 10, 15 years, they're really just a touch-up tuner, and I've talked about this before, and I mentioned it in the video I shot about the internal tuner on this radio. There's a video already out about it. So this is just a supplement to that to address the issue of receive. Well, it's a touch-up tuner. It can handle up to a 3-to-1 VSWR. So if your antenna's got a 3-to-1 VSWR or less, then yes, this tuner can match it. Really what it's doing is it's making the transmitter and the radio see a 50 ohm match so that it will deliver a full 100 watts. You may know this, but these modern transceivers will do something called folding back. At the higher, as the SWR gets into higher levels, much above 2-to-1, the transmitter, to protect itself from being burned up, will fold back, meaning it'll cut the power to therefore limit the current that can kill your final transistors. So, what this antenna tuner really is for is to take an antenna that may already be cut for the band you're going to operate. And so, for example, 80 meters, that's a wide band, 500 kilohertz of bandwidth. It's not likely that you're going to get an antenna that's going to be perfectly resonant all the way across that band. Even if you build a dipole, if you talk to a lot of people that are, purists that will only use one dipole per band, they will typically cut the length such that their antenna is resonant at their favorite frequency. So, for example, a lot of people who have, the evening rag chews with their friends, if their friends hang around 3.856, they're going to tend to adjust their dipole, cut it, and then, you may tweak it a little bit by adjusting the length on each half of it to where it's perfectly resonant at 3.856 megahertz. Well, that is going to mean that it's going to have a higher SWR on the band edges. Okay? Now, the center of the 80 meter band is 3.750. So as you can imagine, an antenna that is cut for 3.856 is going to have a higher SWR down at 3.5 megahertz than it will at 4 megahertz, okay? Because it's already trimmed in such a way that it favors, more toward the upper end of the band. But it will still probably be a bit of a high SWR even at 4 megahertz. So now, high SWR is relative. Okay, most radios are happy as long as the SWR is less than a 2-to-1. But we, as amateur operators, ideally, we like to see a 1.5-to-1 or less VSWR. So, it's these kind of tuners that are in the rigs now assume that your antenna is already built for the band you're operating on, but the band may be broad enough that the band edges, let's say you did adjust the 80 meter dipole for 3.750, and let's say that at 3.5 megahertz and 4 megahertz, your VSWR is, and I'm just going to assume they're equal, because we got it dead in the center of the band, right? In an ideal situation, the VSWR will be equal on each end. So let's just say that on the ends, it's a 2.5-to-1. And you may remember from some of the antenna theory that how broad an antenna is as far as how wide of a spectrum either side of the resonance point that antenna is usable has to do with the size of the conductors, for one thing, so the gauge wire you use. So, for example, if you're using 16 gauge wire, your antenna would not necessarily have as broad of a bandwidth as it might with 12 gauge wire. Okay, but again, let's just say that the SWR is a 2.5 to 1 at 3.5 megahertz and 4 megahertz, and you have it, let's just say, a 1.05 to 1 in the middle at 3.750 megahertz. Well, what this type of tuner can do is touch up those band edges. So it will pull it down and give the radio the appearance of a great antenna, of a near perfect match, even at 4 megahertz and 3.5 megahertz. So the radio doesn't go into fold back. So it'll deliver the full 100 watts to the feed line. Okay? And then after it delivers it to the feed line, then it's up to the feed line and the antenna to take it from there. So I refer to these type of tuners as a touch-up tuner for that very reason. Now let me illustrate this a little bit further. I'm currently connected to a 160 meter doublet. It has about an 800 ohm impedance, but it comes into an antenna tuner via ladder line that has an internal 4 to 1 BALUN. So that takes the 800 ohms and trims it down to 200 ohms. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use that 160 meter dipole as an example. So after the BALUN, it's 200 ohms, and I've got the tuner in bypass mode. In other words, my external antenna tuner that antenna is connected to is currently bypassed. So we're going through a 4 to 1 BALUN and then straight over to this FTdx10. So I'm going to enable the tuner by long pressing the tune button. And you'll notice it won't tune. Look. Because the internal tuner on this radio works off of a bank of capacitors and inductors that are switched in and out via relays. That's the clicking sound that you hear when these type of tuners are working. And there's just not enough real estate inside the radio to put enough capacitance and inductance to be able to handle much above a 3 to 1 VSWR. So at 200 ohms, which is what the radio is seeing now, the radio's not going to tune that. And let's put some numbers on that. The internal tuner on the FTdx10 can tune from 16 ohms of impedance through 150. So somewhere between 16 and 150, it can match a 3 to 1 VSWR. But if it's above 150 ohms, the tuner's going to just, no can do, like you see here. It just says tune for an instant, tries to transmit, and then said nope, because at 200 ohms, the antenna impedance is beyond what this tuner is capable of. Now, I'm going to switch over to a ZS6BKW that is also set to bypass. And you'll see now, watch, when I long press. Looks like it got it down to about a 1.3 to 1 VSWR. So that antenna was already within 150 ohms impedance at 80 meters. Now, incidentally, that antenna's not really made to operate resonant on 80 meters. So that tells me that the ZS6BKW is within that range of 16 to 150 ohms impedance, and therefore the internal tuner of the radio was able to provide a match. And again, what does that match do? Some people say it this way. They say it fools the radio into providing a full 100 watts into the transmission line, the feed line. And, if you want to think about it that way, that's okay. It is, in essence, making the radio think that it's transmitting into a 50 ohm impedance. So, that's okay. However you want to think of it. But this internal tuner is a touch-up tuner. Okay, so now that we have an understanding of what the tuner is capable of, again, a touch-up tuner, let me talk about what prompted this video. So there was a comment on the channel about, asking whether this tuner works during receive as well as transmit, or whether that can be toggled on and off. And yes, there are some older radios that have that capability. But those are the older radios that had, they're bigger radios. They had enough room in them for a wide range antenna tuner. Those would typically be the ones where you had servo motors actually in your radio. For example, my Yaesu FT890, my Yaesu FT920, they have a wider range antenna tuner in them than these modern radios that use the relay circuits. So, and often was the case, those radios had an option for you to not only use the tuner in transmit mode, but also during receive. And here's why. If you're matching an antenna that's a 5 or 6 to 1 VSWR, that's far enough away there that the antenna is not only not resonant enough for transmit, it's not resonant enough for receive, really. I mean, it's not that it won't receive, but it won't be as sensitive. So those radios would allow you to decide whether you wanted to put the tuner in circuit on both transmit and receive. This radio does not have that option, and the reason is it's only going to be able to match up to a 3 to 1 VSWR anyway. If your antenna is within a 3 to 1 VSWR, it's already close enough for receive. And I've already proven that out with this radio when I tune with a tune. In fact, let me turn it up a little bit. So we're currently tuned to that ZS6BKW here on 3860. Well, let me turn the tuner back on. So again, there's with the tuner. Notice the signal meter. Let me scan up to the big screen. Notice the signal meter when I turn the tuner on or off. There's off, there's on. You can see it right here on the display, right there. Tune, off, on. It's not making any change. Now, those of you who are familiar with older manual tuners, one of the things we would do with a manual tuner, because you really don't want to transmit your radio into a 8 to 1 SWR. So we would take the manual tuners and rotate the inductor and the capacitor until we see the most deflection on our S meter or hear the most noise floor. That gets us close enough that when we do transmit, and you don't want to use much more than 20 watts. Some people use 10. It really depends on the tuner. Some 10 is enough. Some you want to use 20. When you transmit 10 or 20 watts, you don't want to be transmitting into an 8 to 1 VSWR. So if you tuned it by ear to where you saw the most signal deflection on the meter, so the needle is rising the most, really, and you can go by the noise. You don't really have to look at the meter. You just go by the amount of noise. See, I've got this attenuated right now, and I've got IPO enabled. So let me turn off attenuation. So you can see where the meter is, about S2. Tuner's turned on, it's still about S2. I'm just telling you, that tuner is not in circuit during receive. Because, well, let's think about this. If the antenna has to be at least a 3 to 1 or less anyway, you're already close enough that you're going to be able to receive. What little sensitivity might be added by inserting that tuner into the circuit, it would probably be canceled out by insertion loss. When you route through a tuner, there's going to be, it's very minimal, but there could be slight bit of insertion loss. Well, the same thing if the tuner is in circuit, what little bit of gain you got might be negated by the insertion loss. Again, it's minimal, but the gain would be minimal as well. Again, because the antenna already has to be a 3 to 1 VSWR or less. So there's really just no need for this radio to insert its tuner into the receive chain. And many of the modern radios that have that type of an internal tuner, relay-based, again, clicking in and out different combinations of capacitance and inductance to provide the match. But they're limited because of, well, the size of the radio is just not big enough to hold servo motors and roller inductors and make these things more wide range. So, okay, hope that makes sense. A little deep dive there into the tuners, specifically the one here in the FTdx10. So, thank you, Patreons, for helping me keep this channel going. I want to thank you very much. I sure do appreciate you guys. You help make this possible, and so your really partnering with me to help get this information out, and I do appreciate that. And if anyone else out there would like to become a Patreon supporter, please consider doing that. You can go to patreon.com/N4HNH. So www.patreon.com/N4HNH, and I'll have it at the screen, at the bottom of the screen here. And of course, if you would, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. That helps us as well, so we can continue to bring this type of content. If you appreciate this type of content and you want me to keep doing it, let me know with a like and subscribe to the channel. If you do subscribe to the channel, be sure to click the bell and you'll be notified when I upload the next video. Okay, hey, I hope that was helpful and informative to you. I appreciate you watching. And so with that, I'm going to say 73 from N4HNH.